Welcome to Order Militaris Radio TV. We here are lifelong Catholics. What we do here is all for free, in love of Jesus Christ and the Most Holy Trinity and His Holy Church, that will defend our Holy Mother, the Church. Our work is the true sense of apostolate. Any funds raised goes back into this work for equipment. This helps us to give you an unbiased, hard-hitting truth that is not controlled by political correctness or interest groups. Today's topic is the Battle of Lepanto. Welcome, Brother Alexis, to the show.
Thank you, AJ, for having me on Order Militaris Radio TV. It's always a pleasure and honor to be on this new internet Catholic apostolate breaking grounds in the English-speaking world for independent media. And to be part of an apostolate, not a money-making operation, that we're doing something we're doing for the love of Christ and for the love of our fellow Catholics, and to talk about all kinds of wonderful topics that are truly Catholic and without fitting them into the matrix of modern errors or systems of control, which have so dominated the Catholic Church around the world, but especially in the English-speaking world. So today we're going to talk about one of the great moments in Catholic history ever. One of the top, you'd have to say the top 10, the Battle of Lepanto. And it's an honor to be on and talk with you today about this, AJ.
Yep. Who led the Turkish Navy?
Okay, let's first start the stage. So we're in the year 1571. Europe is menaced by the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire is an empire founded by the Ottoman dynasty, which was a tribe of Turks that came with the general Turkish migration from Central Asia to Asia Minor in like the 9th, 10th, 11th centuries, butchering and massacring everyone in the way. Along the way, the Turks have a bloodthirsty reputation, and once they captured Constantinople, they set themselves up as the Ottoman caliphs. They claimed the authority of the caliphate, although they had no authority to do that since they're not descendants from Muhammad, but that was how they maintained their empire, by claim of religious authority. And they soon found it was profitable to milk that religious sentiment of the Islamic world, to use it to attack Europe. And they had begun as early as the 14th century invading the Balkans. By the 16th century, they owned a good chunk of the Balkans and most of all of North Africa, and were targeting Italy for conquest. And the Battle of Lepanto is within that geopolitical historic matrix. What precipitated the battle was the advance notice the Christians had from spies at the Ottoman court that there was going to be a huge naval invasion of the West, first by the conquest of Cyprus. And so St. Pius V organized the Holy League of 1570. It was signed by a treaty in May of that year between the papacy, the Holy Roman Empire, Venice, the Maritime Republic of Venice, the Maritime Republic of Genoa, and Spain, who controlled the Kingdom of Naples and Sicily. And it was a naval alliance to defend their countries against invasion. And it was called Holy because they did this for the love of Christ. And their standard is what I have here in replica behind me here. This is the standard of the alliance. You can see the symbol of the alliance is this upper portion here, where they have the crucifix, and at the foot of it, the shields of the four powers. And Order Militaris sells historic replicas of this flag to raise funds for work to defend Christians. So the Ottomans were being led by the their leader was called the Suleiman the Magnificent, or at least he was their chief leader. But their Ali Pasha, Muhammad, Sirocco, and Occhiati are the commanders on on the Turkish side. We could call them Turks today. That would be an anachronism because they weren't all Turkish. They were Greeks, Syrians, Turks, Egyptians, everything from the Ottoman Empire. Modern times, people often say Turks just to kind of generalize it, but this is more like this was definitely an entire Islamic navy, and their ships were built from all around the Mediterranean in the current technology of the day. And they had just finished the siege at Cyprus, where after losing 80,000 men by this tiny Christian garrison, the garrison agreed to surrender if they could leave, but at the last moment, the Turks betrayed them, and the Ottomans betrayed them and beheaded them all and tortured their captain by constantly drowning him in the water and bringing him up. Very vicious. And when the news of that got back to Europe, the Christians' blood was just boiling and they were fit for battle. So no fleet had any way of knowing where the other fleet was. So the Ottoman fleet started sailing towards Italy, following the coasts of Asia Minor and Greece. And the Christian fleets assembled at Messina in Sicily. That's where the island of Sicily nearly touches the toe of Italy. Messina's on the Sicilian side.
What was the reason that all these Islamic forces gave to invade Europe even by sea?
Well, the southern part of Europe couldn't be invaded by the Ottomans except by sea. Their territories were all across the Mediterranean. So whereas they could attack Vienna and did attack Vienna in this same period, just a few years later, it was the Battle of Vienna in 1583. They couldn't get to Italy or Spain or Sicily except by naval attack. So it was geographic necessity to have a naval invasion. And the Ottomans were arguably the strongest naval power in the Mediterranean. The European powers had recently lost a lot of their control of the Eastern Mediterranean to the Ottomans, who became increasingly hostile to any even Christian trading. And the great naval powers of, Genoa was in decline after its defeat by Venice, but even Venice was in decline and had been losing its land holdings. And the Knights of Malta have been greatly reduced. They're going to suffer an attack at Malta and just barely repulse it in this same century. So Italy was a prize for the Ottoman Empire. The Muslims have been invading and raiding the Italian coast since the 8th century. So frequent were the attacks in southern Italy, especially in the heel of Italy, that the big shrine to Our Lady at the very most southern point of the peninsula, if you look at it, it doesn't look like a church because it's disguised so that from the sea, it looks like a municipal building, but that's just a fake facade that's like 12 feet in front of the facade of the church to hide it. That's how frequent the attacks were. And there had been times, even in the 13th century, where Muslim mercenaries had actually taken control of certain cities in southern Italy. They were brought in by the German emperor to help fight certain wars and stayed in for after about 20, 30 years, did Christians organize a crusade to expel them. So they had governed Sicily for centuries, from the 8th century to the 11th century. They ruled most of Sicily. It wasn't until the Normans kicked them out. So they knew about southern Italy, and they knew what a beautiful land it was and how a good land it was to take. So it would be easy for them to maintain control once capturing it, since it's not far from Greece and there are other territories in North Africa. So it was a prize object for them.
What happened at Malta, and how many did the Turks slaughter?
So the siege of Malta preceded this battle, and we'll just review that briefly. It's one of the other great battles in Christian history. Epic one, I would have to say. We're talking about the siege in 1565. This was just 6 years early of Malta, and If you ever get a chance, I highly encourage you taking a trip to see Malta if the lockdown ever ends. It's a beautiful Catholic island and they speak English, so it's kind of like you have a foot in Italy and a foot in downtown London all at the same time, and you can see the fortifications there. I was there in, what year was that? I think the summer of 2010, I think I went, or 2011. And it took place in 1565, and the Knight Hospitallers were defending it with 2,000 foot soldiers and 4,000 men against a combined force of 35,000 Turks, and probably maybe 70,000 altogether. And they held off, and they just wouldn't give up. And they actually ended up winning the battle. The Turks withdrew, having lost nearly half their force from combat and disease. And it's one of the great Christian victories that the Knights, who ended up losing, how much men they lost? They lost 2,500 of their land troops and 7,000 Sicilians. So basically, at the end of the battle, there were only like 400 knights left in the castle, and they had defeated a force 100 times their strength. So quite amazing victory at the Siege of Malta. But this just stirred the wrath of the Ottomans. They weren't, well, that Malta was a tiny island. Maybe they could suck their pride and lose that. Let's go. They decided they'd go for Italy and go for a bigger target this time.
When is young Don Juan of Austria put in charge to lead the fleet?
Okay, so the leaders on the Christian side were Don Juan of Austria, Gian Andrea Doria, the grandson of the great Venetian Admiral Andrea Doria, Alvaro de Bazan, Sebastian Venier, and Agostino Barbarigo. And the chief admiral of all was the papal General Marcantonio Colonna, and this is his flag behind me here. So, a replica of the flag. So, I would say they probably put him in charge because he was the illegitimate son of the Holy Roman Emperor. Okay, and so he had the most clout, and they wanted to have the financial backing of the empire. But he was also the adopted son of Saint Pius V. Since he was illegitimate, Pius V legitimized him, and in gratitude, he asked to be adopted. And so he and Saint Pius V had a close relationship, a Christian friendship, and so he was the obvious pick of all the political powers. He was also the cousin of the King of Spain, so he was, and he had nothing to lose by this battle. Since having been a bastard, there's no way he could ascend to any particularly high throne or position in any government.
How did Venice take a huge role in the defense of Christendom?
So about half of the Christian ships are from the Venetian Republic, and Venice had a checkered history. They were a mercantile republic, and they did stuff to make money. They were involved in the infamous sack of Constantinople in 1204, when they seduced the Fourth Crusaders to break their vow and take a Christian city instead of take Jerusalem back. But at this point in history, they realized they had to ally with the other Catholic powers and fight a decisive war to defeat the Ottoman navies. But especially because of their garrison being lost at Cyprus and the vicious way the commander was treated, they felt they needed to avenge that crime. And we're living here now in the 16th century, when this battle takes place, is not anything like our own. These men were really men, and these Catholics were really Catholics. There was no, oh, you shouldn't be vengeful, you shouldn't be prideful. It was an age where if you tortured the leader of Venice, Venice would come after you with its whole navy. Okay, it wasn't without any shame, without any regrets, without any qualms of conscience. They all knew that was the right and just thing to do, and justice required they avenge the crime. This was obviously before the rise of Marxism, modernism, and all these errors that have so infiltrated Catholics in the West now that, they can't get off their couch. All they can do is press a like button. So this is a very different age, and we'll see in this battle that these guys really kick butt, as we would say in vernacular American English today. The Venetians, though, were at the height of their maritime technological development. They had the best ships in all of Christendom. They knew how to handle them. They knew how to deploy mercenaries on board. And they were experimenting with the recent developments in the use of artillery and armament that had been developed in Italian city-states, because in the 15th and 16th century, there were so many wars in Italy that Italians became experts in the development of guns and artillery and armory. You might know something about Da Vinci's designs of armor and anti-personnel chariots and things of that size. So the Venetians deployed this by creating their secret weapon, which was used for the first time in the Battle of Lepanto. They took large merchant ships, what looked like large merchant ships, and they covered them with iron plate and mounted heavy cannon in the front bow. Cannon had normally been used for anti-personnel purposes, light cannon, and usually deployed on the side of a ship, so as the ship passes by, it could fire at you. And in fact, for the next few centuries, all the naval battles are fought with two lines of ships passing by one another, firing their cannons, because the cannons are on the side. But the Venetians did something that was not done until modern times. They were the first innovators. They put the cannon on the front of the bow, so as the ship would approach, it could fire at whatever it was headed towards, kind of like we have destroyers and battleships today whose guns can fire forward. Their plan was to position this in front of the Christian fleet, so that as soon as the enemy fleet approached, they could pick off any kind of fireboats. A fireboat is a small craft loaded with bombs or actually on fire that you sail into the enemy fleet hoping to catch it aflame, because remember, all the ships are made of wood and they're sealed in creosote to make them watertight, so they're the most flammable things you can find on the water, and to generally pound the enemy fleet in advance before the main battle, because naval battles back then were kind of like floating land battles. The enemy ships would all array in lines, just like on a battlefield on land, and as they would approach, they would attempt to ram each other's oars and snap their oars off, because these ships were moved by oar power, not by sail, or ram the ship and sink it, okay, with a strong bow. And once the ships had interlocked, the men on both ships would jump from one ship to the other and fight a land battle. And that's how the battles were done. So the if you could weaken the enemy's ships before they began engagement, that would be a very effective strategy. And that was the Venetian secret strategy for this battle. But the Christians had no delusions about their chances of winning here. The Ottomans had superior manpower and superior number of ships. And so Pius V asked all Christendom to say the Rosary, put the battle under Our Lady's protection. And you can see that in the banner. The side decoration is a symbol of the beads of the Rosary. And Pius V was leading everyone in rosaries constantly. And Pius V was a Dominican. He's the one who actually adds the Hail Mary to the Roman breviary. And he will get the grace to, in a mystical vision, to see the victory before anyone else knows it in the Italian peninsula. So he was intimately involved. And in fact, St. Pius V is buried not at the Vatican, but at St. Mary's Major, because of his devotion to Our Lady. And some of the trophies of this battle at Lepanto are buried with him in honor of that great victory he had. One of the greatest Dominican popes we've ever had, St. Pius V. He's also the one who canonizes the Roman Missal that many traditional Catholics so admire.
Okay. So at the last of the battle, the Christians start, coming together and then seizing the ships. And how did Ali Pasha die?
Okay, so the battle was not planned to take place off the coast of Naupactos. Naupactos in Italian is called Lepanto, and so in Italian they say Lepanto. In English we say Lepanto, and so the fleets just happened to see each other right there. The Christian fleet had been coming down the Greek coast and had come through a narrow strait and opened up into the Gulf of Patras, which is that big gulf above the Peloponnesian Peninsula in Greece. And the Ottoman fleet was coming out of the Gulf, and they saw one another, and they decided that morning for battle. The Christian commander John of Austria, sailing on a very fast corsair ship among all the others, giving them notice that they'd go to battle, and the chaplains on the ship gave all the men the sacraments and heard their confessions and prepared for the battle. Ali Pasha told his men that if I have victory, I will free all the galley slaves, because the Muslim ships are all powered by oars like the Christian ships. But the difference is that on the Ottoman ships, they're slaves that are rowing the oars, and they're Christian slaves. And this is an important point, which will be part of what goes on in the battle. Ali Pasha promises his men, if I win the battle, I promise you freedom, and if you do well, God will have given you freedom. But as the battle is ready to open up, John of Austria signals to his men, there is no coward in paradise. Okay, so this is a really great Catholic. Let me get his exact words. I think his exact words were, there is no paradise for cowards. And we should remember that, because that is not just a statement that John of Austria said on board his flagship at the Battle of Lepanto. That is a theologically true statement. If you are not willing to sacrifice and for your faith, you will not get to heaven, you'll be damned. And that's why we live in an age of so many people destined to damnation, because they're outright cowards. And they talk, most they'll talk about being men, but they can't even be men. They have little hissy fits and wet their diapers of the slightest little criticism. You say you're a disciplinarian and they'll run away like little boys. It's unbelievable. The shamefulness of modern men is what you get when you watch television and grow up thinking the tube is your father. You know, so
Yeah.
the battle, though, we have to talk about the battle. So the battle was just, it was bloody. It was really vicious. The Christian fleet deployed in a threefold line with all the flagships at the center under John of Austria. The Genoese were at the top, and the Venetians at the top, and the Genoese were in the south. The main Islamic forces were in the center and the north. The battle began at noon. Marco di Colonna gave the signal, raising this flag on his mast, and that was a signal for the battle. And actually, the flag is not just beautiful, it actually is the code for the battle, to separate the fleet into three sections, and for the galleasses to open fire with their heavy guns, and that's what they did. It is said that the galleasses themselves destroyed as much as maybe a sixth or a fifth of the Ottoman fleet in just their opening rounds, okay, because of their guns. The Ottoman ships were built lightly. They didn't have heavy hulls like in the time of the American Revolution or the British ships of like that. They're not like, if you've heard of Old Ironsides, U.S. Constitution. They were much more thinly built, and so cannonballs could easily pierce them, and with one shot, the Venetian ships could sink a ship. So the five galleasses that were arrayed, the four galleasses that were arrayed against Ottomans did considerable damage, but then the battle engaged, and it was really bloody battle. And it seemed, I think, at the height of the battle that the Christians were going to lose. They were being overwhelmed by just the numbers of the Turkish Marines on board. Though the Christians had higher quality Marines and infantry, it was a question of numbers. And but at this point, John of Austria makes a very important decision. He has all his men along the line shout out to the enemy crews, the Christian slaves, that we will not sink your ships. If you surrender your ships and stop oaring them, we will free you, okay? And at that, good sections of the Ottoman fleet stop moving because the galley slaves betray their masters, and the Christians at that, with the extra mobility, end up winning the day. and it becomes a massacre of the Ottoman fleet. After this, the Ottoman Navy was completely wiped out and never recovered. And the Christians would go on to have naval supremacy in the Mediterranean until even modern days. And this is why even Turkey today has like no navy, and the Muslims just don't get it. All their experts in naval, on the naval arts and naval warfare and naval craftsmanship, they were all slaughtered in this battle and went down to Davy Jones' locker. It was a absolutely stunning and decisive strategic and tactical victory. And there were even famous people that, you know, Michael de Cervantes, who goes on to write Don Quixote. He was at this battle, and he had his, I think, his left arm injured. And for the rest of his life, he said, I have done only one honorable thing in life. I have lost my arm in the Battle of Lepanto. And that was the kind of man he was. So not at all like the wimps of our day. It's quite unbelievable. So they get the point where they capture the enemy leader. Let me think. Let me get to that. Okay, so
I think if I remember, he got a bullet in his head and he also lost his head.
yeah, so a summary of what happens was, as the centers clashed with such force that Ali Pasha's galley drove into the Real, the flagship of the Christians, as far as the fourth rowing breach, and hand-to-hand fighting between it commenced around the two flagships, between the Spanish Tercio infantry and the Turkish Janissaries, the finest troops on both sides. When the Real was nearly taken, Colonna came alongside with the bow of his galley and mounted a counterattack. With the help of Marcantonio Colonna, the Turks were pushed off the Real, and the Turkish flagship was boarded and swept. The entire crew of Ali Pasha's ship was killed, including Ali Pasha himself. The banner of the Holy League was hoisted on the captured ship, breaking the morale of the Turkish galleys who saw it. After 2 hours of fighting, the Turks were beaten left and center, although fighting continued for another 2 hours. A flag taken at Lepanto by the Knights of St. Stephen, said to be the standard of the Turkish commander, is still on display in the church of the seat of the order at Pisa. Though I think recently they gave that back at the request of Bergoglio to Erdogan, the Turks, which was, you know, the most jackass thing you could possibly do. As I think Ali Pasha ends up being beheaded, and they take it, and the Venetians take his head back as a trophy. It was there. Now Chesterton writes a whole poem on the Battle of Lepanto, one of his finest literary works, and I've heard that some homeschooling families are requiring their children to memorize that entire poem. I think it's like 900 verses, and recite it as a learning tool. And that's, I can't recommend anything better than that for someone to learn in his youth, to learn about true Christian virtue and what is worthy of praise, not these silly poems written by moderns who don't know what to talk about or what to praise. So the Christian side suffered 7,500 deaths, the Turkish side 30,000. The Christians took 117 enemy galleys and 20 galiots. They sunk and destroyed 50 other ships. 10,000 Turks were taken prisoner, and thousands of Christian slaves were freed. So that was the height of the battle. Great battle.
Okay. Since Lepanto, has Europe been harassed since by the Turks?
Yeah, just a few years later, I think 12 years later, the same Ottoman emperor decided to take Vienna, and he massed his whole army there. He made the strategic error of announcing it at court the summer before, so that gave all Europe time to prepare. And they nearly took the city, but at the last, and they breached the walls. And while they were preparing to actually do the final assault on the city, Jan Sobieski III arrives with his entire Polish army. He actually took out the army of the entire Commonwealth of Poland and brought it to Vienna. And with a surprise attack of his cavalry down the mountain, the steep mountain on the side of Vienna, he shocked the left flank of the Ottoman army, destroying it completely. And that was the Battle of Vienna that is celebrated on September 11th, September 12th, and that's we talked about that earlier
Yep.
in the last month. But they didn't give up. The fighting, the Ottoman attempt to dominate the Balkans, southern Russia would go on for another 3-4 centuries. It's only in modern times with the Industrial Revolution that the Western powers and Russia had enough military force to completely push the Ottomans back. Their power was broken in the Balkans by the revolutions, the three Balkan wars at the end of the 19th century and at the beginning of the 20th, which gave liberty to Bulgaria, Serbia, and Greece, and Albania. And but this is not the end. Now Erdogan wants to revive the Ottoman Empire. He has troops in Libya. He has taken parts of Syria, and now he's involved in a war against Armenia. And he's constantly harassing the Greeks. There's actually images on the Minister of Defense sites where they color in the areas they want to take. They want to take most of the Greek islands along Turkey. They want all of Cyprus. Already in the 70s, they took half of Cyprus illegally in a war that was condemned internationally, but America and the West never did anything about it. And it's said Erdogan wants to extend Turkish rule all the way into Central Asia and throughout the Mideast, like the Ottomans, because the Ottomans once owned from Morocco to Iraq and from Mecca in Arabia and all of Egypt all the way north to the gates of Vienna. It was once one of the largest empires.
What example does the Christian sailors at Lepanto teach us today on how to handle situations that we face today?
I think you could write a book on the example of the Catholics who fought Lepanto. First of all, how they cooperated among themselves and put any kind of politics and nationality aside. You had Spaniards, you had Basques, you had Italians from all over the peninsula. You had Germans from Germany, you had Austrians, you had military orders there. You had the Order of St. Stephen and the Order of Malta. You had the nobles from all around southern Italy, all united under a holy Catholic Pope and working together for the defense of Christendom, because they were willing to sacrifice their life, which would only be another so many years, to defend Europe from Islamic slavery that would last centuries or millennia. And they knew what was at stake, and they knew that the value of their life was not anything measurable in this world, but the honor with which you leave this world. And so the men who died at Lepanto, true martyrs of the faith, they have never been canonized, but they certainly deserve it. They laid down their life for the sake of us all. And so many Catholic men participated in that battle that if you have any relatives from Spain, Italy, Austria, maybe even Germany, you're probably related to someone who was at the Battle of Lepanto and won that battle. And so this is something we should all take pride in. But their courage in the face of death, they knew they could die at any moment. They took the sacraments and they went in the battle without any doubts, and they gave it their all. And their commanders didn't deploy them in a battle that they knew that would lose, or to sacrifice them for some silly, stupid Masonic goal or honor. They were fighting for Jesus Christ. They were fighting for the Catholic faith. They were fighting for Christian liberty. They were fighting against hordes of superstitious pagans of a false religion that were motivated by satanic and absolutely vile motives. It was a completely honest and just war, and there's few times in history that you can actually say that a war was so honest and upright as the ones fought by the Christians, the Holy League of 1571. And this is why in Ordo Militaris we sell a replica of Marcantonio's battle flag, because we want to inspire Catholics in modern times to work together across national boundaries to defend Christians from all their enemies, and without any worry about self-sacrifice, and with generosity, as the men who did at Lepanto.
Let's see here. Any last words?
Lepanto is also an example how if we're going to do anything Catholic, we cannot let any foreign ideas or doctrines infiltrate or be the framework on which we base our action. There are so many Catholic groups now who have been infiltrated by Nazis, Marxists, socialists, under 100 different names, solidarists, corporatists. Um, there is a very heavy attempt, and we cannot deny it, from state secret service agencies, secret spy agencies to infiltrate and control the narrative, the formation, the education. We explained that recently on the founding of Christendom College in the Seton Home study. But you can see that in many so-called traddy groups founded by individuals who are pro-Nazi or pro-pedophilia or pro-fascism, or actually organizations or that are controlled by Gladio or the CIA. So many traddy so-called talkers on the internet are actually military intelligence agents. We've exposed a few, and as we go further on, we'll do that, because if you're going to get true Catholic doctrine, it has to be people who have always been a Catholic and are not working for the CIA, the FBI, MI5, or anything like that. Those people are just absolute liars. As soon as someone says to you, "Yeah, I used to work for the CIA," then you know the guy's a psychopath. Don't have anything to do with them. The CIA would never recruit an honest person. And there's so many of them on social media. Twitter, for example, something like 90% of the accounts are run by some kind of operative, and they're just feeding you lies. And Twitter is a medium, like most social media today, designed to hypnotize you, flood you with a narrative to control your thought, so that you as a Catholic stop acting as a Catholic and start acting like a marionette puppet that does exactly what they want you to do. They want you to vote Trump, you vote Trump. They want you to vote Biden, you'll vote Biden. They want you to do this, you do that. And this is what's been going on the last century. And Catholics will never be free of this unless we break completely free of the control of these systems and go back to imitating the men of Lepanto and the men at the Battle of the Gates of Vienna, or the men who defended Malta, and have nothing to do with Freemasonry or the spy or national politics or the spy agencies of these Masonic nations. Because Masonic nation is not your friend. It's your enemy, and it's your prison warden. And until you get that into your head, you'll never be free. You always will be manipulated. And alas, I think I'd have to say 99% of Catholics today are completely manipulated. They just don't realize how profoundly they're manipulated. You see that in this present election cycle, where you have priests that are no longer preaching the gospel. They're preaching Trump as your savior. Trump is a Freemason, and he's working for the Masonic order to get you vaccinated. He's not your savior. He's the opposite. He's an ally of the Antichrist. And you say that, and people will freak out because they've drunk so much Kool-Aid, because they're not admiring the men of Lepanto. They're admiring what the Masonic Lodge claims are the founding fathers of this country. What it's not. It's actually the Lodge. And it's not, and even the founding fathers of our country are not Catholics. Why should we admire them? Not in the least. So we got to break free of the mind control. We have to break free of the narrative control. We have to go back to these excellent examples of old. Even though people like Chesterton wrote this beautiful poem about Lepanto, he was a socialist, and you shouldn't follow any of the political or economic ideas of Chesterton. He was a Fabian socialist, despite what anyone claims to the contrary. And that's all that is designed to break down Catholicism and Christianity from resisting the Masonic order. We need a Christian party for America, and we need Christian parties in every country that have the first objective the destruction of the Masonic order and the restoration of Christendom. If you're not working for that, stop talking about the social reign of Jesus Christ. You don't care a bleep about the social reign of Jesus Christ, because you're working for the enemy, and you like working for the enemy, and you prefer to work with the enemy. You only hold up the little image of Christ the King to get other people to work with you for the enemy. I mean, that's just the reality of it. And we need to wake up and really start being Catholic, because the world's going to hell in a handbasket is, lightning speed now. And we need to revive the courage of the men of Lepanto. We have to be willing to risk everything for the truth and for Christ the King.
Yep. If you like what we do here on these shows, please consider becoming a supporter either by a one-time donation or a monthly donation by going to ordl-militaris.net. Click on any of the show pages. You'll see at the very bottom, make a free will monthly subscription. You click the blue green button there. You pick which one you want, and you follow all the steps to finish on becoming a donor. I want to thank our two monthly supporters and all the one-time donors we have.
Yes, thank you very much. And if the more you continue to support Ordo Militaris Radio TV, the more you can help us spread the true spirit of Catholic militancy like the men at Lepanto had, and that will help us greatly. And if you'd like get a Lepanto flag like this one, AJ will put a link in the show page where you can do that, and it'll help the work of our order in general.
Yep.
And
this is Ordo Militaris Radio TV signing off. Deus Volt.
Deus Volt.